Okay, I hope you got an appreciation for the Mysterion. Um, I I was surprised to find out that some universities are actually teaching about it, Christian universities, not just you know. I think Tammy watched the propaganda broadcasting system on their Jesus Christ thing, and I need to get a transcript. If you believe any of that, you probably shouldn't be believing it. It's amazing our government, with our money, is putting out anti-Christian propaganda from professors and professorettes across the globe. It's wonderful, isn't it? But and you're paying for it, so you're paying for destruction of Christianity from your tax dollars. But in any case, the Mysterion, as I noted last week, is probably the most important element in the first century specifically, and to today. So as we look through this, as we go through Hebrews, especially from this point on, I probably should have given it earlier, but if you look at if you look at the Gospels, if you look at any of the books in the New Testament, the Greek, well, they're all Greek, but in any case, you looked at all the Greek writings in the New Testament, you will see elements of the Mysterion in everything. There are elements of the Mysterion in everything that we do. All the Easter stuff we do, all our services, our prayers, almost every one of them have some aspect of the Mysterion in them. And so, as we read and look at it, I think it's a critical kind of piece of knowledge. And it's amazing, I think, I think we've lost it, the idea of the Mysterion, mostly because a lot of it is assumed, and a lot of it is, the point of a Mysterion, right, is secrecy. So the Masons, Mormons, and a few small Toltec churches are about the extent of the Mysterions, the active Mysterions today. And the Masons are, for example, a very secretive kind of group. I mean, I think I know their handshake, but they have the 42 levels. No, I'm joking. I don't know how many levels they have. But they have the levels of initiation, and they have the secrets of initiation, and they've kept them secret. I think most people, you could probably buy a book and find out what they are, but, they're more open kimono than, for example, the early peoples were. So we barely understand some of their mysteries because they kept them secret. And of course, they weren't very literate, so they couldn't write a lot of it down. But, the Mysterians, from the mystery plays to, for example, the Passion plays, to the activities we do, to the Greek plays, and I'll repeat this. You notice how every kid in America, well, maybe not today. When I went to school, I was taught the Greek plays. And you may have been taught Greek plays or seen a Greek play even, right?
Hillsdale.
In Hillsdale, yes. Every Greek play is a religious play. They were part of their religious structures. They became the mystery plays, they became the passion plays, that became what? Anytime you go to a play or a musical or even an opera or a ballet, you are basically invoking the Greek mystery plays, because that's where it came from. That's the reason we do it. That's the reason you have a protagonist, antagonist, and a court, right? We didn't get the protagonist helper until, I think, Daniel Defoe, but that's all right. In any case, let's dive. We're still diving into Hebrews, and I know it's kind of a slow slog, but that's all right, I guess. You can't let good things. You have to make a bet and think about good things anyway. Here's some words. I know I've given you this before. Diosune. Diakosunes dikesune. This is dikesune. Dikesune, I gave it to you, and I tried to put it, I always try to improve things so you can see them better. If you look at dikesune, from dikos, from dike, meaning the right or just right thing to do. Dike is basically justice or rightness. We translate this righteousness, but look what it says in the Greek. It's equity of character act. I'll reinforce this. The people mistake. Remember, people mistake this. This is the pure Greek. Remember, Mercury on the globe, right? Came to represent what? Mercury on the globe came to represent not FedEx, but
FTD.
FTD. Yeah, it was. It was FTD. FTD. But unfortunately, they didn't understand. It wasn't a globe, and it was Mercury. You know why it was Mercury, right?
Messenger.
Well, he was messenger, but he was also.
Fast. He was fast. Winged.
But he was the god of thieves. Mercury was a messenger of the gods, but he was also the god of thieves. Mercury is the perfect analogy of Dikasune, because he had, well, this isn't, okay, he had, his balance structure was like this. All goodness and all badness, all in one, right? And he isn't balancing on the world. He isn't standing across the world or striding across the world. He's standing on a ball. Dikasune represents, in the Greek worldview, equity. Equity, a balance. And so, in a Greek worldview, the guy with a perfect balance is the one who's all good and all bad. The reality is more, what are they looking for? They're looking for a balance. They're looking for the guy that's the life of the party, but at the same time has moral, is more, right? The person who can tell great jokes, but they're all good jokes, and they're all not dirty jokes. You get what I'm saying? The view of the equity in the Greek worldview is the guy who can hold his liquor, he will drink. But he doesn't drink to excess. You see? And so the word in itself has this huge connotation in Greek worldview that is very different than our connotation, right? So much so that Strong says, specifically, the Christian justification. This word is a common Greek word, so every Greek guy who's wandering around is saying, yes, this is Christian justification, right? No. You know, so Mercury is Christian justification. Oh, I don't think so. So I'm just saying, you know, we've taken this beautiful Greek word and turned it into something that is, does anybody know what really righteousness is? You got to be careful with righteousness, right? Because righteousness to certain groups is very different than righteousness to other groups.
So would you say righteousness is cultural?
The Greeks would say no.
Well, I asked you. Although you profess to be a Greek, you're not. So.
I'm not a Greek, no, and I'm not sure I profess to be a Greek. You know, I'm Anglo-Saxon to the core, and Anglo-Saxons don't have a problem with this. Anglo-Saxon culture is more honor-based than Greek culture, although it is a Vita culture, so it's warrior-based culture. The thing about, I would say that it is not necessarily culture-based. However, the cultures, for example, if we say, what's the Greek worldview of a warrior in Dikasune?
He fights honorably. Yeah, you fight honorably, but you don't go overboard.
I agree 100%. But there are groups that would say, for example, even Christian groups who could not reflect that. Right? Mennonites?
They would say it was anti-God to fight.
They would say it's anti-God to fight.
Pacifist, right?
Right. They think, they miss, well, and we never had those groups until 1826. So did the culture change or what changed? Literacy changed. We had more Bibles available, especially in translation. And so a lot of cultures like Mennonites and other cultures come out of that because they don't know Greek. If you know Greek, you don't have a problem with it because you realize that Jesus did not say, turn the other cheek and fall on your face and die.
Right.
Turn the other cheek does not mean anything like what the modern worldview thinks it does. We read it in English because from 1826 we had cheap Bibles. And so a lot of the cultural affinities we see in the church come out of a lack of understanding of what the Bible says. I'll stick on that. Now, on the other hand, for example, Anglo-Saxons. What would Anglo-Saxons say about Dikasune and a warrior. Probably about the same thing, but guess what? They would say that they're not unhappy with a warrior that basically goes berserk, right? They would say, if you go berserk and kill a lot of people and you die on the battlefield, and by the way, the Greeks didn't think unbadly about that either, because the Spartan mothers told their sons, either come carrying your shield or on your shield, right? Either come back victorious or come back dead. That's what Greek mothers told their Spartan children.
Not very balanced.
So
isn't the proper definition of a warrior as someone who fights under authority?
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but that's kind of a modern rendering, but I don't disagree necessarily. I would just say, you said, is it cultural? And I'm not sure it is cultural. I think it has more to do. I mean, we understand equity very well when we talk about eating and drinking, right? Don't overeat, don't overdrink. When I start running into the point of, like, for example, banking, don't be over fastidious, but don't be under fastidious. Well, what does that mean? Giving in charity. The Jews talk about this. If you give too much, you give the labor, then you impoverish yourself and your family, right? But if you give too little, you're stingy. You're not following God's view, right? So I don't think it's so cultural as we want it to be. I think the problem is, and I'll leave this to you, is to find where the equity is. A beautiful example, lying versus false witness. It doesn't say don't lie, right? If someone asks you, do you like how I'm dressed today? And you think it's terrible, you might say, oh, you look fine, right? Right?
But that's social. That's social.
Well, there are people that will tell you that that is a blatant lie and that you can go to hell and be damned in hellfires for it. But you know what? In the Bible, in the Old Testament, it says, you shall not bear false witness, which is a totally different kind of idea, right?
Because you want to say, like, if you're hiding Jews during the Holocaust, you want to say, no, I don't have any Jews here, right?
The Jews solved, I believe that we in Christianity have solved this problem because we already discussed this back in the 1200s, 1300s, way back, right? We've already been through this. This is where the leftists, this is where the erudite, say that Christianity, argued about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. Look, that is a intentional attack against Christian philosophy, because Christian philosophy is the basis for all philosophy. So if you read back, we've already been through these arguments, these discussions about what is dikasune and what does it mean. And by the way, the Jews have done this too. For example, your example, if you're a spy, or if you're hiding someone, protecting them, is it okay to bear false witness about it? Guess what? The Jews say it is okay to sin to prevent a greater sin. Now, we have a little problem because what do we say about sin, which isn't exactly true? We say all sin is equal. But if I take a gun and shoot you and murder you, that is much different than if I just hit you in the face, or if I slander you, or if I say something bad about you, right?
But our culture has different penalties.
I think it was maybe an overreaction to the Catholic Church and their whole mortal and venial hierarchy, where some things weren't so bad, or and their whole mathematics of penance and how many years you have to spend in purgatory and everything.
Yes, I don't disagree with you. I think you're right on. I think that's what it is. It's a reaction to that. There's a lot of things that out of the Reformation are reactions against too much. Yeah. Right? And what did they do? They went too far the other way. And so we find ourselves out of dikasune.
But how did the Jews put intentional versus unintentional sin on that level.
You know, you see, what they did is they played directly into the message that Christ and Paul specifically were telling them. There's the 36 things that you do, and guess what? Every Jew has done the 36. So there is no sacrifice for sin, so where's my sacrifice for sin? And that's what Hebrews is all about. That's why, and by the way, here's the lead-in, that's why Melchizedek, a Gentile priest, was tied, right? And that's where the argument, the logos to tell us. Here, listen to the other words. Diakrisin. Diakrisin. Diakrisis. Diakrino. If from diakrino, dia is a preposition, means a channel of act. This basically means judicial. This is judicial estimation or judging. This is judging. The reason I point this out is, okay, Paul and Jesus supposedly told you not to judge. However, the Bible is full of you should be judging. Over and over again, the Bible tells you to judge. Well, our translators fixed that for us. For example, this word is usually translated as discern or disputation. But it means, specifically in Greek, judicial estimation. This is what a judge does. And so our translators helped us to keep from judging by not using the word judge. Isn't that special? I wonder what's going to happen with those translators when they talk to God. But that's okay. Just saying, this is an interesting word. I wanted to throw this in. I'm glad I had room to put it in. R-I-A. Esoterian. Esoterion. This is a single word, a singular word. It's not a combination of words. And what it means is literally by the senses, and it means an organ of perception. And when we get to the verse, organ of perception. When we get to the verse is beautiful in what it says. However, this is translated, luckily translated senses in the King James, but completely mistranslated in the NIV. And I think I've got the NIV in my notes, so we won't miss that. In any case, we're at verse 13. If you remember, let's see, this is a logos to telos, and we have moved from the logos to telos. We've been talking about Jesus Christ, and now we've talked about the priest bearing to the temple the sacrifice, and the priest bearing in the order of Melchizedek to the people. So to the temple and to the people, and we've come to the point, and we've been yakking about this for a while, about Jesus Christ being a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, which we've talked about, we outlined, we saw for the ages. That means that the ages of Melchizedek was a Gentile who tithed Abraham. And so that is kind of a key. So Jesus is not only assimilated with Melchizedek, who is a Gentile. By calling him that, he just called Jesus not just high priest. He just called Jesus a Gentile. Do you see that? Now, we just went into a different section where he's talking about milk and meat. And by the way, not just milk and meat. What's very interesting, he uses the words milk and rations, as in military rations. In 13, it really says all, pas. Pas in Greek means every which thing, everything in the whole universe. Pas, who metacheo, who participates on gala, on milk, being is added, and being still is added, on milk. An infant, a nepios, a child, is not acquainted. Is ignorant with the logos. not teaching, with the logos. Teaching would be diakasune. It's not teaching, it's the logos. Logical argument about is added dikasune. Here's my translation. All who participate in milk as a child is ignorant with the logical argument of equity. This is a really strong statement. And look at the words. Very strong. Especially if I told you, we know that this author is writing to the Romans, to the Greeks, to the Egyptians, to the Hebrews. I mean, it even says it in the front, right? It's also writing to the Mysterion. And I told you, who was the main participants in the Mysterion at this time?
Roman Legion.
The Roman Legion. Yeah, we know this very strong, especially their Mithrin worship. And look what he says to them. Boy, these are very unusual, and this is hugely strong. All who participate in milk, and he's using milk as an analogy, a euphemism for logical argument. As a child, is ignorant with the logical argument of equity. He just slammed the Greeks big time. And remember I told you, the author before this had said that if you don't understand, you should be talking to your neighbors. You should, if you don't understand this, the assumption is that you should be going to your neighbors, because if it is written directly to Hebrews, right, you'll be asking your Greek friends what it says, to be most precise. Okay, remember I told you, the Romans, well, they understand Greek as well as they study it, but it's only the really erudite who got it, right? The Greeks know it pretty much well, but there is a problem. Koine Greek is Koine Greek, but I assert all the time that they're writing in near classical Greek, Athenian type Greek. There's multiple Greeks. Koine Greek is the worldwide Greek, and that's cool. But there may be things that the average Greek may not fully comprehend, especially from Hebrews. Very complicated document. The Egyptians know Greek very well, right? They've been Greek since 332 BC. So they better have assimilated, or they ain't talking to nobody. The Hebrews, the Mysterion, it depends on who the Mysterion we're talking about. In any case, he just said that they can't comprehend a Greek way of thinking. He just equated a Greek way of thinking with what? Comes back to your cultural question. Is it cultural? The author of Hebrews tells us that a Greek way of thinking is the way who's thinking? Yeah, well, at least Big J, right? Big J is thinking this way, which assumes if Jesus equals God, then that's the way God thinks. And I would assert to you, although I'd love to be Greek, I'm not Greek. Well, modern Greek is a problem, but ancient Greek, I'll be happy with that. I'm just saying, if we're Greek thinkers, we do the logos to telos. And you know what? Jesus certainly represents to me a logos to telos, doesn't he? I mean, how many times does he answer the question?
Never.
And this isn't a disparagement against Jesus. You just got to understand culturally. I mean, didn't you think this when you were a kid? I mean, I did. Every day I read the Bible as a kid, and I'm like, well, Jesus didn't answer the question. Jesus didn't say. And what do most of our opponents, what do the collegiate professors and professorettes tell you?
Do what I say.
Well, no, what do they say about Jesus?
Just a good man, a wise teacher.
He's a good man, wise teacher. We can't understand what he's saying, but he's a good man and a wise teacher. And the big question, it always asks, did he ever say he was the Son of God? Now, you've been in my class, so you know the Greek.
Not directly.
Implication.
Well,
By
yeah.
a very strong implication.
Yeah, they say not directly. And I tell you that if I go ego imi,
He said ego in it.
Yeah,
I am.
that is as strong as you can say it in Greek, because it's a cultural thing, right? So you got all these professors and professorettes at the university that say, oh, Jesus never said he was a son of God, and Jesus never said he was a deity, and Jesus never did this, and Jesus never did that, and it's not really miracles, and, you know, all this stuff. And by the way, guess what? I've read ancient literature. You know how many miracles are in Caesar? Hundreds. You know how many miracles are in the Greek documents? Hundreds. You know how many miracles are in every Greek play? There's a thing called a Deus Ex Machina. That's like the classic Greek thing where the God comes and solves all the problems. These are called miracles. You find miracles in all ancient texts. So why would you say that some miracles, what do? You hear it all the time, right? Caesar's false. Caesar's silly. Caesar never was a great emperor, and he believed in miracles, right? He wrote about them. You ever read Caesar's Gallic Wars? Full of miracles. I'm just saying. You know, it's astounding how we look at documents differently because we think, you know, we don't want to believe one, but we want to believe the other, right? I'm not saying you in general. I'm saying that your professors, you know, your professors and professorettes at university, right? God forbid we believe in or that we're convinced about Jesus, right? Anyway, it's interesting. Just said they can't comprehend the Greek way of thinking.
So before Babel, everybody spoke Greek. This is a joke. This is a joke, but I'm saying that's an extension of what you just said.
You know what is really funny about that is think about Hebrew. Hebrew is probably the most euphemistic language that there is. Very, very euphemistic. And Greek, on the other hand, is over here. And you know, if you want to stick your foot in the theological pool, when would you send Jesus? When the language is really euphemistic and hard to write? It could be a real resurrection or a false resurrection, right? Or would you send it when you have a culture, and of course there is no word for resurrection in any language until Christ, but would you send them to a culture with a super concrete language and a very logical basis? Which means that it's unfortunate we're not teaching Greek anymore, right? Well, of course, you would never teach Greek. That's a Bible language, right? Pretty funny, pretty interesting. Anyway, let's look at 14. But steros, but stable, but literally rations. Solid food, solid trophy, rations. Stable rations. This is really interesting because we translate this solid, it's been translated for solid food, but it basically says stable rations. What's a stable ration?
Hardtack.
Well, if you said it was stable in the sense of, let's look at the word steros. Steros means, I've got it right here. I didn't give it to you as a word of the day, but I've got all the definitions. I always keep them. Steros is stiff, or solid. Stiff or solid. So steros means it's translated steadfast, strong, or sure. It could be translated like, as in, you know, you get it routinely, right?
Well,
But
it could be, but isn't it also the change or metamorphosis from an infant only having milk?
Yep.
I mean, we do it with our own kids. I mean, when we take them from milk, we go through, transform through formula, and then, I mean, the term we use in our family is our kids are now eating solid food.
And I think there's even more to it than that, because think about this. When you have an infant and they're on milk, when are they eating?
All the time.
Whenever they want to. All the time, whenever they want to, right? But once I get them on stable rations, right? It's, well, in there's two, read my book, 2 meals a day. People did not eat 3 meals a day, you know, until way late. I mean, the last 2 centuries, you know, the 20th century, really. So, yeah, you know, we're on stable rations, so we're feeding the kids in the morning and in the late afternoon, right? So stable rations. And by the way, who's the only people that really got stable rations?
Soldiers?
Yeah, soldiers and military. And if you read my book and see what they were eating, you know, I'm not so sure it's stable as in, like, you know, we get what? Protein bars, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I told you when I went to Iceland, or I was going to Greenland, right? And I'm like, okay, it's time for lunch. We're getting the airplanes refilled, and I said, what do I get for lunch? And the chief pilot said, well, here's your ration bar. He gave me, basically a protein bar. I'm like, oh, if I'd been running this, I think I would have called for, I would have called ahead and asked for a box lunch. Maybe I'd get like a whale sandwich or something. I don't know. In Greenland, yeah, you get a narwhal sandwich or a thing. I'm just saying. But, being handed a protein bar and you're starving to death is kind of like, okay, this is the disappointment.
Stolen out of the life raft.
By stable, do you mean more like dependable? Because they got it, twice
Yes.
a day, every day.
I think you can read it both ways. I don't think there was as much stable in the sense of like a protein bar that'll last for a year, right? As much as we're talking about stable in the sense, especially comparing to new, infants, who basically, they get the mother's breast because they didn't have bottles. Did you know this? There's no bottles, right? They're just mama's breast. So anyway, but stable rations is for the not mature. The teleos. The teleos. Who are the teleos? It's translated as the complete, those who are complete. But who really are the teleos?
Those who've gotten to the conclusion.
Yeah. It's those who've gotten the conclusion. The logos to tell us if you figured it out, right? Wow. I mean, okay, so, our translators are like dumbing this down for us, but that's okay. Who by constant use, not like constant use, by hexes, habit, by habit. Constant use is different than habit, isn't it? Habit, I don't know why they thought they needed to translate. They made this word, this isn't even an Anglo-Saxon word. Why would we say constant use when the word is habit? By habit, have gumnazo. I almost gave you this word, gumnazo. Gumnazo. Gumnazo means this is naked. It means to exercise naked. Because guess what every athlete did in Greek culture?
Competed naked or trained.
They competed and trained naked. To the Greeks, being undressed was not a big deal. In the Greek culture, remember the slaves many times were completely undressed walking down the street. They didn't care. People were undressed, and the big deal was for the other cultures, though. You have to review and look at each of these cultures and see where they stood on this. But who through gymnazo, who practiced naked in the games, themselves, their senses, this word, esterteron, their senses. Okay, it doesn't say that they practice athletics. It doesn't say they practice. Okay, what did they do? Gymnazo, you know what this word is, right? Gymnasium. Gymnasium. It's where you train naked. Now, what did they do in the gymnasium? In the gymnasium? Do you remember? I think I've talked about this before. What did they do? Not only did they train, like as in athletics, so they did their athletics.
Somewhat more holistic.
They had classes.
Yeah, they had learning.
Yep, they had lectures. The difference between the three different groups you had or the three different things you had: the gymnasium, you had the shula, and you had the lyceum. In the lyceum, you did what? You discussed. In the lyceum, you discussed. It'd be like master's degrees, right? So everybody is at an equal footing, or supposedly, except Socrates and Plato and those guys who are really much smarter. But at the lyceum, you discussed a logos to telos. In the shula, it's a school, and you basically got lectured. You paid for the lectures. So you weren't discussing like the lyceum. but you didn't do what? You didn't do the exercise. You weren't naked. You were sitting around in your Himaian and Pelopos, and you were listening to the you were listening to the lecture by the a shula is very similar to what we have today. That's our educational system. In the gymnasium, however, you did not just athletics and lectures, you also had religious training. And by the way, in my book, The Second Mission, something had really bothered translators for years. And it's like, dude, why can't you figure this out? There's a word, and I can't remember, I think it's Peloplesion. Anyway, it's a word meaning the hanging sacrifice. And they were really surprised that specifically it's written in one of the Socratic dialogues about the sacrifice that is hanging in the gymnasium. Why is there a sacrifice hanging in the gymnasium? Any idea?
It was to the gods.
Yeah, it's to the gods, but why in the gymnasium? Because those, as a matter of fact, in the article or the written thing, the priest claimed that Socrates had eaten from the sacrifice hanging in the gymnasium. Why is there a sacrifice hanging in the gymnasium? What do you want your athletes to eat? Meat. Yeah. Protein. You want to eat protein because they are learning, they are getting lectures, they are going through religious studies. The gymnasium is where they train the youth and train people for the games, and generally it was where you trained if you were a free person. And the thing that was that there was always meat available. And that's part of this thing of sacrifice. And so when I translated the words, I'm like, duh, this is obvious to me what it means because I understand what a gymnasium is. But if you think that a gymnasium is like a gymnasium where there's, naughty boys like, Hans and Franz, and that's all they're doing is, doing the pump up thing, right? Then you don't understand the Greek viewpoint. The gymnasium is the exact and perfect, and gymneos, the word that it comes from, training naked, is precisely the idea of equity that we're talking about. Because when you're training your body, you're training your and you're training your spirit. Yes. Remember, we have sarx, suke, and pneuma. And so the Greeks would say, I train the sarx, that's the body, that's athletes. I train the suke, that's the mind. I train the pneuma, that's the spirit. Exactly correct. And that's what they believe in the gymnasium, gymneos, means. So when it says gymneos, to practice naked in the games, their senses to decreases, to make a judicial estimation, to judge kalos, the good and beautiful, from kakos, the worthless. In Greek, the ends of the line are not bad and good. They are kakos, which means worthless, and kalos, which means the good or beautiful. To the Greek worldview, the good equals the beautiful. That doesn't mean if you're good looking, you're going to be good. That's not what they mean. They mean that good equals beautiful in the sense that when doing the right thing, the equitable thing. Do you notice this isn't about equitability? The Greeks would never say, in my opinion, it's important to be partially worthless and partially good. Their viewpoint is instead that you want to be all good, right? And if you were to put beauty on this list, the Greeks would definitely have a ugly and a beautiful, Unfortunately, in our euphemistic language, right? What do we got in our euphemistic language? To us, euphemistically, if you're pretty, you're good, right? That's not the way the Greeks viewed the world. As a matter of fact, we know that because hagios, awful, means to them spiritual, right? Hagios pneuma. Hagios pneuma. Awful means great or powerful. But to us it means ugly, right? Awful as in hagios, hag, right? These are cultural things that we can't, it's really hard for us to grasp in our minds, right? But our author's using almost a pure Greek thing. Here's a translation. But stable rations are for the complete, who by habit have practiced naked in the games their senses to make judicial estimation of the beautiful and good from the worthless. Okay, did the author just tell you you're supposed to judge?
Yes.
Yes. So please do. Let's go to chapter 6. Let's go to chapter 6. Therefore, and here's a very nice translation. Therefore, let us affimi. Okay, not leave. I really interesting how we take these words and reuse them or mistranslate them. Affimi means to send forth. It doesn't mean to leave. It means to send forth. And affimi is a word that's used a lot in the Gospels that we translate as leave or depart, but means in the Greek to send forth. Let us therefore send forth the, not elementary. This is really interesting how they mistranslate this. The arche, the chief logos, not teachings, logical argument. Why they would want to make logos teachings, I have no idea. Because what did they translate logos and lego as in John? The Word, right? Why would they suddenly begin using logical argument as teachings? I don't know. That's diakosune. But anyway, or that's didache. Therefore, let us send forth the chief logical argument about Christ and Pharaoh, to bear or carry, to telotes, not maturity, to completeness, not katabalo, not throwing down again, literally anew, it's not foundation, although that's okay translation. It's themelios, that's something you put down, of repentance, a matona, to exercise the mind amid, to reverse one, literally to reverse one's thoughts. From toil, that is added, lead is added, to is added, literally toil, necros, dead, and of peace, of persuasion, not faith, of pieces, of persuasion, on theos. Let me see, here's a translation. Therefore, let us send forth the chief logical argument about Christ, and bear as a completer, not throwing down anew the foundation of repentance from dead work and persuasion about God. In other words, the author is telling us, I don't know what it says in the NIV. Somebody read it to us in the NIV so it's complete. Anybody got it right there in front of them? Chapter 6:1.
Therefore let us leave the elementary teachings about Christ and go on to maturity, not laying again the foundation of repentance from acts that lead to death and of faith in God.
And here's a more direct, concrete translation. Therefore, let us send forth the chief logical argument about Christ. Let us send forth, not leave it, send it forth, and bear as a completer, not throwing down anew the foundation of repentance from dead work and persuasion about God. Kind of a big difference between the two, wouldn't you say? Let's go to 2. Let's see. Got all my notes. 2. Now, here we go. Instruction. So instead of teaching, the word is didache. Didache means teaching. So they've been translating logos as teaching. Now they've gone to translate the proper word, which is really teaching, as instruction. But that's okay. That's a good, okay translation. Didache, teaching about is added. Baptisms, baptismos is immersion. In Greek it means immersion. The epithesis, the place on of hands is added, on of is added. Epithesis is place on of hands. The anastasios, stand up again of the dead, the necros, and perpetual judgment, karina, decision, judgment. Literally, krima, diakrino means to judge. Now, in the one case, they translated diakrino, which means to judge, as decision. Now they translated krina, which means decision, as judge. I think that's really interesting. Why they would do that, I have no idea. The translation is teaching immersion, placing on hands, the stand up again from the dead, the resurrection of the dead, and perpetual decision. Perpetual decision. In other words, if you want to throw judgment in there, that's good. I think that's a good thing. Basically making self-decisions. So, the impression we get in the Hebrews, the impression we get is that the author is telling us we're going to not talk about these things. But the point is that these are considered the foundations of the knowledge. That is, the foundation is the repentance, the work of persuasion about God, the teaching of immersion, the laying on of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and perpetual judgment, making judgments. In other words, the author is telling you that part of the basics of Christianity is to be able to judge. I think that's really interesting. So, this is what the author tells us is the basis. This is the logical argument of Christ. I should probably put that in a note someplace. And this is very interesting. In 3, the word is yanper, if. It means if in Greek. If theos, not and. Kaie is and. I don't know why they put and in there. If theos, not permitting, it's epitrepo. Epitrepo means allow, that is to turn. We will do so. You can read this two ways in the Greek. I'm going to give you one translation. We will do it if God changes his mind. You could also read this as we will continue in this until God changes his mind. One of them is really Hebrew and the other one is really Greek. The really Hebrew is this. The Hebrew rabbis would tell you that if God came down right now and said, I'm canceling the commandments, what would they do?
Wouldn't change. It's not God.
They would laugh.
Yeah,
Because
God wouldn't do
God,
that.
yeah.
That changed the whole fabric of the universe.
that would change the whole fabric of the universe. So if you read this in a Hebrew sense, and we will do it if God changes his mind. In other words, if God changes his mind, we're going to keep doing this. That's a very Hebraic view. If you read it in the Greek worldview, and we will do this until God changes his mind. And the until is not in there, by the way. That's, kind of can be read from the verb. The point is that we will continue. This is what we will continue to do. So, I think it's understandable in either context. And by the way, this is a very erudite writer. So a very erudite writer might mean it in both ways, right? For the Greeks and for the Hebrews. And he already told the Hebrews to do what? Ask your Greek neighbors if you don't understand what I'm writing to you, right? You kind of already inferred that. 4, it is impossible. It's not impossible. It's literally abdomateos, not capable. It is, I guess, not impossible, not capable. That's okay. 4 is added. Those is added. Who have is added. It says, it is not capable. Hapax, one time. Ben is added. Enlightened is photosio. means to shed rays. Shed rays. Now, where do you get that from?
The
The-
first chapter where he's talking about Jesus being the light of God.
Which comes from the
Mysterious.
Mysterion. What he's referring to is probably a Christian. Remember I told you that Christians were infiltrating the Mithrans? And remember one of the Mithrin things? Remember what Jesus Christ told in the Gospels? Let your light shine. And one of the Mithrin rituals is to hide a light, a candle, a lamp under a bushel basket and reveal the light. So guess what we're seeing here? This is evidence that the Christians are already infiltrating the Mysterion, and they're using some of their stuff. We do the same thing. What do we do on the Easter, right?
Eggs and butterflies and bunnies and
Well, we the light, right? We do the light, service of the light. You know, where we light the candles. We do it at different, times. We have a lighting ceremony of candles. It's no different. So this says, those who have who've shed rays. They like to translate it enlightened, but okay, it's enlightened, lighting, shed rays. Who have tasted gumei, not this gumei, but literally tasted the heavenly doria, sacrificial gift. What's the heavenly sacrificial gift? What have you tasted?
Jesus.
Eucharist.
Yeah, the Eucharist. Yeah, Jesus Eucharist. So this, look, we want to read this as like ephemeral. But remember, the Mysterion, what did they do? They shared in a meal of the deity and with the deity. The Christians didn't eat the deity, but guess what they did? Right? What's our thing say? We are eating the body of Christ. Guess where that came from? That is not a Jewish view, right? It's a Mysterion view. We've brought into our culture these pieces of Mysterion. So the heavenly, partaking of the heavenly food, taste, is a Mysterion idea. The shedding of the lamps or the rays is a Mysterion idea. And by the way, it's Doria, the sacrificial gift. Who's the sacrificial gift? Jesus Christ. Who have, become sharers in the Hagios Pneuma. Hagios Pneuma. Now, I'll start here next time. And we have a class next time, right? Two more. Not capable, who one time shed rays, tasted the above the heavens sacrificial gift, who became sharers in the Hagios Pneuma. We'll talk about this more, but this is where our launching point. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray that you look out this week. In your name we pray, amen.